Hello. We're a little bit late, I think. Peter, are we starting?
What's the weather like, Jason?
The weather here is dark. It's in Paris. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. It's dark, and I've got all the lights on to make this kind of look like it isn't quite as dark as it really is outside. As you can hear, my voice is a little bit deep because it's very early in the morning.
Yes. Well, I am so glad you joined us, and I'll just like to say welcome to everybody who's joining us, and welcome to the Australian Search Marketing Academy. Well, I've been really looking forward to this webinar with Jason, and to get his brilliant insights into how Gutenberg blocks are fundamental to your WordPress SEO. So, but firstly, let me quickly mention, in Australia we have some exciting events coming up, and the event that in particular I'd like to speak about is the Australian Search Awards on November 12 at Sydney Opera House. And if you're in search marketing in Australia, this is the premier event, the awards where everyone who has performed well will be awarded. Hopefully, if they come along, it'll be terrific. semrushawards.com.au. So let me introduce Jason. With over 2 decades of experience, beginning in 1998, Jason is a well-known and well-respected digital marketing consultant, speaker, author, and the host of SEO is AEO podcast. Jason has now become a full-time 100% digital nomad, speaking at conferences around the world and interviewing industry experts, all the more for our benefit. Jason is one of a kind in the industry, and we're so happy to have him on the webinar with us. So welcome, Jason. What is hot in SEO for you right now? What's going on?
Thank you, Peter. Entities is what's hot. Knowing what entities are, building Google's understanding through entities and relationships through entities. That's really hot. But hotter today is blocks.
Blocks.
I was I'm going to say something naughty. I was at a Typo 3 event last week in Holland. And Typo 3 apparently have always used blocks. So for them, when I mentioned blocks, they said, this is really obvious. This is something we've been doing since the beginning, whereas WordPress is now just coming into blocks. So this presentation of blocks, for anybody who knows Typo 3, is going to be old hat. And for anybody who's in WordPress, probably relatively new hat.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? So where the world is catching up, or the 35% of the internet using WordPress. So 35% of the internet is catching up on Gutenberg or blocks. But I mean, of course, Gutenberg's the thing that makes blocks happen, right?
Yeah, exactly. 36% use WordPress. Gutenberg is now standard in WordPress. And 14% of the web actually use Yoast, and I'm going to mention Yoast later on because they're really helping with this idea of blocks. They're really building on this idea of blocks, so they're building blocks, as it were.
Okay, so why should we care if we're search marketers, we're SEOs? All we care about is traffic and getting conversions and increasing website visibility in Google. So why should we care? What have you got for us to help us understand all of this, Jason?
Well, I've got an explanation, of what Google's problem is. In fact, I'll show that first slide. What Google's aim is, what Google's problem is, and how we can help Google. And obviously the helping Google part is all about blocks. And the idea of blocks is fundamental to the way we're moving forward. So anybody who's kind of thinking, well, Gutenberg, I don't really like it, maybe I can ignore it. You're making a big mistake. You can't ignore it. You won't be able to ignore it for very long. Blocks are the fundamental, if I may say, building blocks of the web today. I've made that joke twice already. I'll make it a third time until you laugh, Peter.
I snickered, but I didn't. I didn't quite laugh yet. I'll laugh in a minute. I might have to laugh so you won't stop saying it.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's kind of like on the podcast. I punish people until they laugh at my jokes. So yeah, anyway, what I'm going to present is this idea of what's Google's aim. I mean, understanding its aim is fundamental to us doing our job. And as you rightly said, attract that traffic that's going to get us the sales. If we understand Google's problem, we have some empathy for it. Obviously, we don't have much empathy for Google, but if you have empathy for somebody or something, you can better understand what it is you need to do to make them happy. And in this case, we want to make Google happy, so it will send us traffic. And I think we often forget that when Google sends us traffic, it's sending us its clients. The people it sends over to us are not our clients to start with. They're Google's clients, and Google is trying to satisfy them. So Google needs empathy for its clients. We need empathy, for Google. Once we have that, we can obviously then have empathy for the people it sends to us who are going to be our clients. So that initial question is understanding Google's problem. And then once we've understood that, we can help it to solve its problems. And I call that digesting and delivering.
That sounds very logical.
It does. It sounds quite complicated, but it actually isn't. So once I've gone through this presentation, you will say, oh, that sounds very logical, and it's incredibly simple.
Okay, I like the simple part of it, but of course, the problem we often have when it comes to anything SEO related is that no matter how simple you make it, there seems to be still work involved, right? So this is going to take a bit of work, I think.
It does take quite a lot of work, but Gutenberg actually lifts a lot of the load from us. And I think we should be grateful to Gutenberg for that. And I was talking to John Mueller, who, when I presented this idea to him, said that I said, "Oh, that's incredibly simple, isn't it?" And he said, "Yeah, it's simple, but it isn't easy." So I think we need to bear that in mind. That however simple as you rightly say, it's never easy. It always requires work. Thankfully, Gutenberg relieves us of some of that work.
Okay, well that sounds good. I like that.
So you want me to start off? I can tell you what Google's aim is. Off we go.
Okay. Yes, please, Jason.
Big question.
Google's aim?
What is Google's aim? Brilliant stuff. Google's aim in the hummingbird world is to answer the user's question or solve their problem quickly, optimally. I think we can, and I like the idea of answer engines. That's why I called my podcast series SEO is AO. Which I sang very low just then. But in fact, it's solutions to problems. There are answers to questions, which is basically a solution to a problem. Its aim is to bring that solution as quickly and as optimally as possible to its users. So the user asks a question, Google wants to give it an answer. That is qualitative. So what's Google's problem in trying to do that, bring the answer to the question of its users? Its problem is understanding, evaluating credibility, and what I would call deliverability, i.e. delivering the result to the user in a format that is relevant to the user in the context in which they find themselves. So the first thing it needs to do is understand the available solutions. The World Wide Web is the biggest ever database, and it contains a phenomenal amount of knowledge. And the problem that Google is going to have over time is not collecting the data, the HTML, or the content, because that's really easy. It's got a robot, goes around, it's been doing that since 1998. So it just collects the HTML, pulls it in, sticks it in a database. Its problem is extracting understanding. And one would imagine when we read a page, we find this very easy. We look at this, for example, and we can see that Leonardo da Vinci is related to Italy. He's related to Michelangelo and the Mona Lisa. He painted the Mona Lisa. He comes from Italy. He lived in Italy. We find that very easy to understand. Google doesn't. Not because it's stupid, but because, it's really tough because the web is an incredibly disorganized mess. I skipped through 2 slides there because I was leading up to this disorganized mess idea, and my robot there looks terribly unhappy, and I like that, but nobody ever sees that it's got a frowny face that I drew on especially for today. And I think we tend to see the web as kind of organized, but it isn't. we misinterpret how we're presenting the information because we see it clearly, because the designers are terribly clever. We see the information and we can analyze it and digest it very easily. And we forget that behind it, Google needs to read the HTML to be able to understand it. And we as human beings tend to be terribly disorganized. Second problem that Google has is delivering the solution. Delivering blue links was really easy. I mean, if you think about it, all it's doing is putting out the meta title, the meta description, and putting it on the page. We click on it, we go to the page, and then the user deals with what's in the page. We land on the page, we read it, and we can find the content we're interested in. So, I mean, Peter, from your point of view with WordPress, for the last 20 years, we've been saying, okay, here we go, blue link, click on the link, come onto my site, get the content. Everybody's happy, Google's sending us traffic, and the user getting the answer. Would you agree with that?
Oh, wow. Blue links. The days of 10 blue links.
Yep.
So now we're dealing with SERP features and
Exactly.
all kinds of rich kind of search results. Yeah, it's a different world.
Yeah, and isn't that brilliant? I mean, it actually, as users of Google, this makes us happy. As site owners, it makes us unhappy because Google isn't sending the link, the clicks anymore. Here's a really nice example with William Shatner. He's got his Twitter boxes, he's got his knowledge panel, he's got a top story down there. We also have videos, we have images. And Google's problem is it wants to deliver this multimedia content because as users of Google, that's what we want. We want the answer quickly. We want it on the SERP. As site owners, obviously, we don't. We prefer the blue links because it sent traffic. But I think it's important to remember that we're not going to change this as site owners. As users, perhaps if we say to ourselves, as a user, I prefer this, then maybe we can better work with what Google's trying to do and what Google's going to do, whether we like it or not. We need to adapt to this world. So we need to help Google. Google wants to deliver that answer on the SERP as quickly as possible, except, of course, for sales. And I think that's important, is Google will still send us traffic when it's time to buy, or when it's trying to get longer information, long form content. So we might be looking more towards a world where Google will give quick answers, where the traffic is actually not that useful to us, except perhaps for tagging and tracking people for remarketing. But other than that, you're saying, well, if it can give the result on a SERP, it will give the result on a SERP, and we need to help it. And Jono Alderson from Yoast talks about blocks. If you want one of the smartest people in SEO, and you've had him on the show a couple of times, I would think everybody's had Jono on their show at some point. I've had him on the podcast. Yeah, have you had him on?
No, definitely. We've had Jono Alderson, terrific wealth of knowledge, powerhouse of information, and absolutely this whole thing of blocks. I think there was a little bit of debate, though, wasn't there? Whether sections or some other kind of...
Yeah, it's actually Dixon Jones who said sections. We come to that debate a little bit later.
Oh, okay. I preempted that one, did I? Yeah.
Yeah, you did. It's okay. We'll come to that a little bit later. Jonah said blocks, and I really like that idea because it covers a lot of ground. And we'll see later on why blocks isn't the only way to look at it. But blocks is the way, if we look at the web, blocks is a really, really lovely way of seeing the web, understanding the web. The World Wide Web is a set of blocks, and those blocks are websites. And as you said earlier on, 36% of them are WordPress. This is my beautiful design, graphic design, where we've got Typo3. In fact, we've got Joomla, we've got WordPress, and then we've got all those other junky sites. And I say junky in a flippant manner, of people who just code how they feel like coding. The advantage of something like WordPress is it's standardized. And that's why Google today are investing in WordPress. If you've heard, they've invested, I think it was $1.5 million to take on some of the best WordPress developers in the world to help push WordPress forward, because that idea of standardization is incredibly important for Google today. The web is terribly disorganized. When somebody builds their own website, they've got their own logic. It's very difficult for Google to actually get a grip on it, get a handle on it. When it's standardized, as in WordPress or Typo3 or Joomla, it's much, much easier. So coming back one step, we think in blocks. The World Wide Web is full of websites. Those websites are blocks. Each and every website is a block. This is our particular block today. And we go in and we've got categories. Those are blocks as well. So within the website, which is within the World Wide Web, we have blocks which are categories. And within those categories, we have blocks that are pages. And up until now, Google's been delivering pages or links to pages. But when we look inside the page, if anybody knows HTML5, semantic HTML5, those are blocks too. If you look at that, that makes a lot of sense to us as human beings. We have the header, we have the footer, we have the aside. And it makes sense to us visually. We can see that and we can understand it at a glance. Google can't. It doesn't see that in the same way we do. It has to analyze it. So semantic HTML5 will divide the page into blocks so that Google understands which part is the header, which part is the footer, which part is an aside, which is information that's related to the main content but isn't necessary to show or to understand the main content. And then the main content, which is the article. And with semantic HTML5, that article is identified very clearly to the machine, which makes it easier for it to understand and digest. And within that article, we have other blocks. So here we're looking at blocks within blocks, within blocks, within blocks, within blocks, if I've counted correctly, and I think I did. And those blocks are H2s with subtopics underneath the H1. You've got the H1 that gives the main topic. Subtopic is an H2 with a paragraph. That's a block. Then another subtopic with a paragraph. That's a block. And within that, we have an H3 subtopic of subtopic 2. So we have block within block within block within block within block within block. And if you look at it that way, the web becomes very easy to visualize in our minds as human beings. It's very logical, which is what you said earlier on. And for a machine, it's very easy to understand for that machine which part it can use, which part it can extract in order to give it to the user. And we'll see that in a moment. But in fact, I've got to blocks within blocks within blocks within blocks within blocks, but it's still not over. We can go further with blocks. And as that says, if you know the song, it ain't over till it's over. I like music. I'm a fan of music.
Yes.
Gutenberg forces us to make those sub-blocks, those H2s and H3s properly. I think a lot of us, when we're designing, we'll look at it, we'll do it visually. We'll choose the H2 and the H3 visually instead of semantically. Now, semantically would mean that we have this block within block structure, and semantics are very, very important for Google. And I've seen many, many clients where they go straight from H2 to H1. Sorry, they go straight from an H1 to an H3 because it looks prettier. And we're not talking here about design. We're talking about organization. And if you organize correctly, Google can digest it better. But here we have an H2 with a paragraph, and we can see here a Gutenberg block. That's me playing the double bass 25 years ago.
Lovely.
And we can see that
Very,
it's got figure
very
there.
enthusiastically thinking forward to blocks, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking of blocks even when I was playing music on stage. I was folk punk, and it was. I was actually talking to somebody about music, and there are a lot of people in our industry who have played music or still play music, because music has this idea of linearity, which is organization of the music within bars, beats, and so on and so forth, but also the non-linear side of being inventive. And I really like that idea. But that idea of linearity is actually, once again, here, blocks within blocks within blocks within blocks. It's organizing and structuring so that other people can follow, other people can understand, other people can digest very easily. Now, here we've got the H2 with a paragraph, and we can see a paragraph, an unordered list, and a figure. Gutenberg forces us to organize like that. It doesn't allow us not to organize in blocks. So some people say, oh, I don't really like Gutenberg, and I think it's because it forces them to organize themselves. And when we get something that forces us to organize ourselves, we get frustrated because it's a bit slower, perhaps. But that organization is what's going to make Google properly understand. There we have a figure which is a video. That's the same band. I've embedded a video using Gutenberg, and once again we've got that figure which is semantic HTML5, which indicates to Google this is media. It's either an image or a video, and it also has underneath that delightful caption, which is also identified as being associated very closely to the image, or in this case the video, as being the caption that goes with it, which allows Google to understand that those two go together in a block. Brilliant.
Great.
Block quote, Twitter boxes are block quotes, and we'll see why that could be important later on. Tables, it forces us to do tables correctly. And as you can see there, at a glance, we can see that it's about the SEO is AO podcast, which is me, and 3 different episodes with 3 different people. We understand that. Google can digest that very easily. And that's in a table. It's tabular data. Google is terribly keen on tabular data. So here we have all the different blocks that Gutenberg allows us to use. My first reaction to Gutenberg was it's quite limited. And in fact, it isn't. When we look at that, that's what we've got today. That's already quite a lot. There's in fact more than that, but I couldn't fit it on the page. There's much more coming. So Gutenberg gives us enormous possibilities to actually organize our content in blocks and still keep a decent design. And I think we have to remember that the fact that we're organizing our content in blocks does not mean that it's presented in a boring block-like manner. Designers can work around that, and the design becomes separated from the organization of the content itself. And if we allow ourselves to have that kind of jump of imagination, that design and presentation, organization of the content, the design presentation of the content is separate from the organization of the content, we'll be much happier. This is organization, not design. So when we see a block, we don't need to think that's going to look blocky and boring. The designers can make it look really interesting. The next stage is helping Google to digest. Google needs to digest, and blocks facilitate ingestion. Ingestion meaning actually taking the food in. And if we come back to this, understanding credibility and deliverability, this is something else I told John Mueller, which is if we as SEOs just look at that, that's what Google wants. It wants to understand, it wants to analyze and evaluate, are we credible? If it's understood that we have the answer or the solution for its user, it then needs to understand, are we the most credible solution? Once it's decided we're the most credible solution, it has to decide, are we deliverable in the context the user finds itself? Before, with the 10 blue links, we were all deliverable in the same manner. We're not all deliverable in the same manner today because we've gone multimedia. So coming back to this idea of understanding, Google needs to understand that you have the solution in order to present it to its users. The beast, and that's my nice, pretty little robot beast, wants to understand. I was using the beast before, but I don't have a drawing of a beast, so I had to use the pretty cute little robot. And
smiling with the thumbs up.
The thumbs are up because it's gathering. The robot gathers. Gutenberg helps Google to ingest because it's organizing things in what I used to call chunks. And that's the debate that you were talking about, which we're coming to in a moment. And then Google digests in order to understand. So we've got this thing called GID, which is an absolute rubbish acronym, but I'm going to use it anyway. Gather, ingest, digest. That's what Google's looking to do. Gutenberg helps with ingesting.
Correct.
Next, we need to help Google to deliver, and this is the deliverability part. Blocks facilitate that delivery. We have understanding, we have credibility, and we have deliverability. What is deliverability? Deliverability is the capacity for Google to be able to give the content to the user in the format that is relevant to their query in their context. And that today is not just blue links, it's also video, images, it could be the answer box, it could be a table, tabular data. For me, that's a deliverability factor. Because those SERPs are going multimedia, and we're back to William Shatner here, I wanted to remind everybody of how rich the SERPs have become. And the reason they're not richer today is not because Google doesn't want them to be, it's because there isn't the quality content out there for Google to be able to make those SERPs richer. So somewhere along the line, in terms of content, and this is slight aside, we should really be looking at thinking, what multimedia elements can I give Google that will be relevant to the user in the context of the query they have made? So we're looking at a content strategy, which is now multimedia and not just writing blog posts. So Google SERPs are going multimedia, and in order to deliver, it needs blocks. So we're coming back to the blocks. Blocks help understand, they help the ingestion and the digestion. They also help with the delivery. Now, I used to say chunks, and this is the debate you mentioned earlier on. I said chunks, and I thought that was great. And then Jonah said, no, they're blocks. And I thought that was better. And then Cindy Crum said Fraggles. And we'll see what Fraggles are in a moment. And Dixon Jones, to come back to him, actually told me that Microsoft used the word chunks too. So I wasn't as stupid as Jono had initially. That's not fair. He didn't say I was stupid. That's very unfair. He said blocks is a better term than chunks, and I think he's right. But Microsoft used chunks, Jono uses blocks, and Cindy Crum uses Fraggles. And I like Fraggles because it gives you this idea. It's a fragment with a handle. So it's a fragment of content with a handle on it. And if you think of an H2, a heading, you can see that as a handle with the paragraph being the fragment of content. And I have this image in my mind when Cindy Crum talks about that, of Google reaching into your content. You can actually see my arm reaching into the content like that, grabbing a handle, pulling it out, and putting it on the SERP. And if you use that imagery in your mind, Gutenberg makes total sense because it's creating these fragments with handles. It's creating Fraggles, as Cindy Crum would say, to be able to simply pull the content out, put it on the SERP. And that's what we saw with the William Shatner example earlier on. And for me, that image makes so much sense, and it helps me understand why I need to use Gutenberg.
Okay, can I jump in here with and interject with a question from one of our viewers regarding what you're talking about, the Fraggles and the handles and this kind of thing. This question seems to fit right now because it's saying, so I'll just read it out. Hill Web Creations, LLC. Jason, how do you see Gutenberg blocks doing a better job at getting featured snippets, FAQ, and Q&A SERP results than the blocks used in HTML5?
Okay. Well, Gutenberg blocks will facilitate getting them. They're not necessary for getting them, but they definitely facilitate. In some cases, for example, we're talking about FAQ and Q&A, a Gutenberg block will be necessary. And we'll see later on how Yoast is providing the schema markup behind the Gutenberg blocks, which allows you to get the Q&A underneath, or sorry, in the SERPs. So I think the idea that blocks are unnecessary is true, but they definitely facilitate. They definitely allow Google, and we're looking at the Fraggles page, once again, to reach in, pull the content out, and plonk it onto the SERP. So definitely it's a big help.
Okay.
So we have our friend Cindy Crum. She gets, unfortunately, displaced by Moz, but it's one of her articles as the featured snippet, because Google is able to reach in and pull that fragment of content out, the exact fragment of content that matches my query, which isn't the meta description, it's within the content itself. And there is a question about that blue link that I find very interesting. I had always thought that Google could just pull out the H2 and put the H2 as that blue link. But in fact, Gary Ilias told me that isn't likely to happen anytime soon. So although it's pulling out a fragment for the content itself, for the answer, it's still using the meta title for the blue link. And that isn't likely to change, according to Gary Ilias, in the near future. So we still have some limitations, especially in this particular case of the featured snippet, that the blue link is still limited to the meta title. I think that's important for everyone to remember. Also, I wanted to say this. How much wood can a woodchuck chuck? If a woodchuck could chuck wood, I can't say it. Can you say it?
I'll give you one more shot. I'm sure you can get it.
How much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood?
Yeah.
I set myself a tongue twister at 7 o'clock in the morning. That was very stupid of me. We also have these videos, and we saw the video of me playing the double bass earlier on. In fact, I couldn't get that to come up as a fraggle or a fragment or a video within the set, but I could get Yoast to come up really easily. Yoast SEO tutorial, Google is able to show that tutorial right there in the SERP. And if we notice here, people are saying, oh, that's really rotten because then I don't get the visit. Yoast hasn't got the visit here, but it's definitely got some lovely branding going. Yeah. So if we use the SERPs to brand ourselves, and I would like to say the website that we have is a representation of our brand that we control. The SERPs are also a representation of our brand that we control partially. and we can control them partially using these blocks. So there you have a lovely video from Yoast. There you have multiple videos from Yoast. And as you can see, Google doesn't just pull videos from YouTube. We tend to think it does, but here we've got a video being pulled directly from Yoast. I also know Anton Schulke from Semrush. If you type his name, his videos come up, and they're all on Twitter. So Twitter videos get pulled up as well quite easily in these video blocks. So YouTube is obviously the strongest, and it isn't because it belongs to Google, because from what I understand, the different departments of Google don't even talk to each other, but because YouTube have got an SEO team who are actually quite good. Facebook has the problem that there's so much content out there that Google has trouble crawling it all. LinkedIn has the problem that Google can't crawl very many pages. It gets blocked because it can't log in. And Twitter, however, has this direct feed into Google, which means that videos on Twitter are actually pretty easy to get up into these video blocks. So my two favorite targets for videos would be YouTube and Twitter. And also, now that we can see it on your own site, because that gives you more control once again. And you can use these Gutenberg blocks, and I would assume Yoast is using those Gutenberg blocks to get up there. And I don't think Yoast would be getting up there if they weren't using the Gutenberg blocks. Also blocks lists, counties in the UK. That's a really nice example because Google's able to pull up not only the counties, although it thinks Bristol is a county, which it isn't, but there you go, with images. And we have images as blocks allows Google to say, okay, this is the image that corresponds, because it's got a caption, it corresponds to that particular part of the content. So once again, we're looking at organizing content in blocks and allowing Google to mix and match, in this case, between images and unordered lists, excuse me. This one, pulling out a block of information from Amazon, that isn't Gutenberg, but I like this example because you've got Bose headphones at $33,900.
Wow.
Yep.
Which when did you purchase those headphones, or?
Yeah, I've got them here.
Yeah. Okay.
No, in fact, it's $339, but because Amazon haven't put a dot between the 339 and the two zeros, and it was just formatted so that the two zeros were small and the 339 was big, Google took it to be all one number. It didn't see the span as changing the meaning of the text itself. And this is a very good example of design. We had 339 big and the two zeros tiny. Design against clarity and understanding. And the design has taken over the clarity and the understanding for Google here, and it's gone $33,900. That's a fair price for a pair of Bose headphones.
So who's wrong in this case, Jason?
Amazon
or Google?
Amazon, 100% Amazon. They should have put the dot between the two. Google takes what you give it. So I'm going to criticize Amazon and say you got it wrong. And this is an example of Google tries to interpret, but if you don't help it, and that's what we're talking about, if we remember earlier, if we don't help it, it's always going to have trouble. So help it as much as you possibly can. Don't forget the dots in your prices. Organize everything in blocks. And something like this is a really nice block that I worked on for years and years and years. Obviously, that's a Wikipedia block. But if you look at Wikipedia, that's terribly block-based. Always has been. And that's why Google finds it so easy to digest. And that's why you can pull out who my parents are, what the movies are, the albums, the music albums I've done, because it's organized in blocks and in tables. So Wikipedia is a great example. If you want to know kind of how blocks could function, look through Wikipedia, you'll see that everything is in blocks and everything is incredibly well organized. And then you've got images for blocks. Once again, Google pulling out these images and putting them into the SERP very easily because they're organized in blocks, because they have the figure caption, the figure HTML tag around them. And a quick special mention, I mean, I think we're all reasonably au fait, aware of what schema is, but schema is something I'm really interested in. Once again, Jono Alderson from Yoast, he started talking to Yoast about it last November, and he has built he's writing the book of how to write schema. And what's very interesting
Okay.
about that is Google have invested in WordPress on pretty much every front except schema. Why haven't they invested in schema? Because Jono and Yoast are doing the schema for them. So basically, I now tell my clients who don't use WordPress, if you want to write schema, install a copy of WordPress, use Yoast schema, and use that as the template for writing your schema. Because whatever happens now, if 36% of the web is WordPress and 14% of the web is Yoast are writing the book on how to write schema. So follow Jono, follow Yoast, use them as your template. And if you've got your Gutenberg blocks installed, you can actually use them directly through Yoast. At the moment, they've only got how to and FAQ, but you need to remember as well that other plugins are now hooking into their system to write their schema. For example, recipes. There's a plugin recipe plugin that's using Yoast's structure and using Yoast's hooks to write their own schema markup. So all schema markup in WordPress should now be going through the Yoast plugin, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm terribly biased because I think they're great. So the conclusion, and we're almost there, we're almost finished. The conclusion is that for understanding, the understanding part of understanding credibility and deliverability, think in blocks. You help Google ingest and digest the information that you're trying to give it, and you help it understand so that it can understand that you have the correct solution. And when you think about the deliverability part of understanding credibility and deliverability, think Fraggles, because Google can reach in, grab that handle, put it out, stick it on the SERP. There you go. Thank you.
Wow, terrific. So that's mind blown. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I got up at 5 o'clock this morning to finish that off. My mind was blown, and now I'm feeling a bit lightheaded, to be honest.
We have some more questions. I've seen a question here from Simon Cox, and I'll just perhaps this might go into a bit of a discussion too here. So HTML5 allows the use of multiple H1s on a single URL. So how does Gutenberg do this? And how does Google understand multiple H1s in a URL?
Well, personally, I wouldn't use multiple H1s. Sorry, Simon. Simply because for simplicity's sake, especially with Gutenberg or WordPress, the title of the page is the H1. And as far as I'm aware, I don't know, sorry, if Gutenberg allows you multiple H1s. I've never looked at that. So Simon's asking a tricky question. But I generally would not do it because I don't think it's helpful to anybody. Using an H1 and then saying, okay, everything else is a subtopic. If you don't have one overall overriding topic on your page, perhaps you should be creating a second page. What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, I've always thought along those lines. I mean, I still go back to, I guess we're in a new world with blocks, with Gutenberg, with HTML5, everything's new, but you're still looking at how to organize information and how to retrieve information. And so to me, I'm still feeling like we're using a library system here. And so, if we're organizing, we just really want to have one main heading, I guess. To me, using more than one H1 on a page would be the same thing as giving a chapter of a book two chapter titles. Not sure how it would work.
No, yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, technically you can use multiple H1s. In truth, I think it's confusing for everybody. And if you really want to, I mean, in terms of design, I think sometimes people want to put two very big chunks of text. They want to put the text nice and big. You use spans and use design, CSS for design and not for semantics. There is a whole argument about multiple H1s on a page, but for anybody who isn't incredibly experienced in web development, I would suggest stick to one H1. You're pretty safe there. At least you're not going to mess it up. So you've got one H1, then everything else is an H2. If you find yourself thinking, oh, I've got another H1 here, create a new page. There you go. That's my advice for the day.
Okay. I'll go with that. Yes, that's the definitive answer on H1s.
Oh no, 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 no. I'll get told off by Simon Cox and Aaron Bradley.
Yeah, I'm just hoping for a bit of debate here.
Well, Simon will certainly type something terribly rude in the chat box.
That's okay. That might spark some interest.
Jolly good.
Now, thank you for that question, Simon. So we've got another question here, which is again by Hill Web Creations LLC. Do you think that the video schema contributes to videos showing up, or more the impact from blocks?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I mean, whether or not schema contributes to being a rich element in the page is a big debate, like the H1. These two, Jeannie and Simon, are asking the tricky questions to try and catch me out. So thank you, and no thank you. I suspect that schema markup does contribute. There are certainly some elements that you cannot get without schema markup. So I think we can safely assume that schema markup does contribute. And if you look now, if you know about the European law for publishers aiming at protecting publishers, saying that Google have introduced into the Search Console now an opt-in, opt-out for can they show content from your page in the SERPs, and that was the European the European Union trying to protect publishers. And what Google have now said is that if you use schema markup, you're explicitly telling them they can use that content in their SERPs, which means that Google are now saying by default, and not for everybody, basically by default, everybody can use anyone's content. You get the option to opt into this protection idea. Everybody has this option now within Search Console. If you opt in, you need to mark up the content you want Google to show in the SERPs. So we're moving towards a world where Google are saying schema markup explicitly tells me I can use this content in the SERP for my users. So I would say schema markup, perhaps thanks to this European law, is now becoming the bedrock, as in the Flintstones bedrock, of what Google can and cannot show in the SERPs, or will or won't show in the SERPs. We're not there yet, certainly, but I think if you're not putting schema markup into your pages, you're getting left behind.
Wow. Yes, that's a very daunting prospect for people who are still catching up, I guess. I mean, that kind of, maybe I can explore this idea for a little while. I mean, this idea that the Gutenberg's in the new world, the new version, HTML5, schema, all this kind of stuff. I mean, if we want traffic to our site, we need to be doing lots of work to get all this kind of work done, right? So what do you say for maybe a small business, or perhaps a smaller blogging site, or even a bricks and mortar business who's trying to compete, and just the manpower required? What can we do? What can these businesses do?
Well, one thing I think is a real pity is that anybody who can't just switch to Gutenberg has had their site developed outside the core of WordPress, because all Gutenberg does is replace the traditional text editor. So the idea that Gutenberg is this incredibly complicated beast is, in theory, false. The problem becomes when the developers who have made your site have not stuck to the core ideas behind WordPress. So theoretically, you should just be able to swap out the core editor and put in Gutenberg, and the content should still be there. If that isn't the case, go back to your developer and, unfortunately, get them to import it all. I mean, the other thing as well is you've got to remember all this data is in a database, as the name implies. So in fact, theoretically, the developer could actually write a script that can just convert all this. You don't need to do it by hand. So perhaps as a smaller business, you could find a developer who is capable of doing that. Because if you think in terms of blocks, once again, if your post is in the visual text editor and it's in a kind of messy HTML chunk, then you start to understand why Google's having so much trouble understanding and extracting this information to digest it correctly. And if it finds it very difficult to do it on a site-by-site basis. But if your developer goes in and sorts it out for Google and sticks it into Gutenberg, it all becomes terribly standardized and you're helping Google. And unfortunately, if you don't help Google today, Google will no longer help you.
Okay. Well, that leads me on to another question here from Candace DeVille. Hi, Candace. What are your thoughts on re-engineering an entire site content in Gutenberg, especially if we're talking hundreds of pages, posts? Where would you draw the line? Maybe some people have thousands of posts. I'm not sure. What do we pay someone? Do someone sit down and spend hours and hours? I guess going into Gutenberg and doing all the layouts, the formatting. What do we do, Jason?
Well, I mean, I switched my site to Gutenberg to see how it would work, and I realized that I hadn't organized the content as well as I thought I had. So it gave me a bit of a slap in the face and taught me a bit of a lesson, which isn't a bad thing. I felt a little bit embarrassed, but then I switched it all. I've only got 10 or 11 pages, so it's not a big deal, and I did it in a morning. You mentioned design. The design is something else. The design is the CSS, and each Gutenberg block can have its own CSS, and the page can have its CSS. So in fact, the design and the organization are two very separate things. All Gutenberg is doing is organizing the content. It isn't to do with design. So you need to look at your CSS to get the design right. Look at Gutenberg to organize your content correctly so that Google can correctly both ingest it and deliver it. And if you've got thousands and thousands of pages, then you need to pay a developer to write a script to do it automatically. So there is that problem as well, as even if you get somebody to do it automatically, you still have to go through and check the whole thing. But if you remember typo 3, sorry to say typo 3, this is a very rude word in the WordPress community, I know, have always used blocks. Blocks are the past, blocks are the present, blocks are the future. So you have no choice. Sorry.
Okay, that sounds very zen. There's only one moment, that's now, and that's blocks.
Exactly. So, I mean, unfortunately, unfortunately for small businesses, unfortunately for all of us, we have to swallow the pill, bite the bullet, however you want to put it. We have to move forward with this because that's where the world is going. That's where WordPress is going. Google is investing in WordPress for a reason, because it's trying to make its life easier. Oh, the other thing is Bing have introduced an API that you can actually inject the pages. You can submit your pages so they're indexed immediately. Google also have the same thing. But that's coming, and Cindy Crum, our Fraggles friend, as it were, is now obsessed by an API to inject individual chunks, blocks, or fraggles of content into Google. And if you ever want to do that, you have to organize in blocks, fraggles, or chunks, which means you have to use Gutenberg.
Okay, so how about if we have previously been pretty good with our HTML layouts before, going back to the old days of the tiny MCE, and if we were using H1s, H2s, H3s, ordered lists, numbered lists, captions, titles, all kinds of things. If we were doing all of our HTML the right way, how much easier is this going to be for us switching over to Gutenberg?
Yeah, sorry, that list you just gave of H1's lists and tables, do you have it written in front of you or do you just remember it?
Well, that's going back to the old days of using Notepad to build websites.
Brilliant.
And
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you actually remember all this stuff. That's brilliant. I think if you,
W3C.
oh yeah, Simon Cox is obsessed by that, and rightly so. Ooh, better not offend Simon. Um, I think if you're already organizing your content well, if you already organize it well, the switch should be relatively simple. As I said, I mean, I organize it reasonably well, and my switch was pretty simple. But it did, as I said, give me a slap in the face for some things that I hadn't done as clearly as I thought I'd done it. So if you've organized yourself well, the switch shouldn't be too difficult, or it should actually, if you've organized yourself perfectly, you should just be able to switch from one to the other, and there should be no problems at all. There should be has big inverted commas around it.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, it's install a dev version of your site, a development version, a development platform, and play around with it. See what happens. If it breaks it terribly, then you're going to need to call a developer. If it doesn't look too bad, you can do it on your own. Do it on your own. You're probably fine. Don't do it on your live site. Whatever you do, don't switch from one to the other on a live site, which is what I did, of course, because I'm too lazy to install the dev platform, and I just wanted to see, because I'm 12 years old in my mind.
Yeah, do what I say, not what I do.
Exactly. Yeah. Brilliant. And don't visit my site because it's absolute rubbish. But that's another problem. And somebody's asking about Divi or Eliminator.
Well,
Those
actually,
already work in blocks. Sorry.
yeah, I was going to ask you that one because Alex Lewis has asked that. How does Gutenberg handle page builders like Divi or Elementor, but also Beaver Builder, that kind of thing? Uh, and the question is, it feels like page builders are already building things in blocks. Is that a fair
Yeah, I was kind of
question?
hoping. Yeah, well, it's a very fair question because I don't know the answer. I was hoping you would have the answer, which is why I tried to ask the question before you asked it.
Oh, you're trying to get me to answer that one. Well, I don't know. I think Elementor is quite fun to play with, and
Yep.
Divi. I mean, it looks and feels like blocks, and I guess makes it easier for us to build a page. But I've traditionally kind of avoided most of those page builders, and because I'm too stuck on the idea of controlling the HTML myself.
Oh, that's
So
that's because you use Notepad to write your sites, though, isn't it?
yeah,
Well,
yes,
what I was saying, I mean, I don't know Divi or Eliminator particularly well, but these page builders, if they are to survive in a Gutenberg world, are going to have to conform. So I would suggest that well maintained systems like that are going to be safe over time because they're going to have to adapt. So I wouldn't say dump Divi or Eliminator. I think you can safely stay with them because they're going to go that way as well. But I mean, you can always also reach
so
out
I
to
have.
their. Sorry.
No, I was just going to add a little bit on there because so I was talking last week with a guy named Ricky Blacker from WP Engine here in Australia, and talking about Studio Press, and I was asking him about this, and in particular with a page builder and how does it work, how well is it going to handle it, and so I have it on good authority from Ricky Blacker that Elementor with Studio Press handles Gutenberg quite well. So that's the word. Let's see what anyone else
I
says
have
about it.
I have another question. Did you actually know that
Mm.
answer and you were playing me for a fool?
No, I just have a slow recall, and I just I just remembered it towards the end of what you were saying.
Okay, so
uh,
you're the elephant of the WordPress world, yeah?
well, okay, slow to remember, but never really forgets, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. I like elephants, by the way. It wasn't an insult. I do apologize if you took it the wrong way.
Not at all. I do like elephants, and but I'm not sure about the elephant in the room. which is which is which is that we're coming towards the end of the webinar.
That was a brilliant segue.
You like that one?
Yeah, I love that.
It seemed to work. It seemed to roll on, didn't it? Any last words? What about a takeaway for us? What's the takeaway that everyone can go away and implement today?
Well, for me, the takeaway is since I started thinking in blocks, and since I started looking at the fact that Google are moving towards being a multimedia or providing multimedia results. I mean, I look at Google now as this machine-driven version of Yahoo. I mean, Yahoo's first page is human curated, and it's the same for everybody with some personalization, but it's human curated. And Google is becoming that kind of Yahoo, but machine generated, machine curated on a query by query basis. And that blows my mind. So we're looking at moving towards that, and blocks allow it to do that. And I've got an article on Search Engine Journal which talks about how the search and the ranking algorithm functions. I call it Darwinism in search. And these rich elements, these blocks, are coming in. And each time a video, for example, a video block, it comes in, it kills off a blue link. So we have this Darwinism where the blue links are disappearing. And if you're relying on that page level indexation and that page level blue link ranking, you're going to die. So you have to think in blocks, you have to think in multimedia, you have to make your content varied, and you have to make sure that it's deliverable, i.e. that it's the most relevant format for the user in the context they find themselves, whether it be video, image, blue link, featured snippet, carousel, list, table. So I'm trying to get this list that you got earlier on. So think about your content in blocks. If you don't think in blocks, if you're still thinking in blue links, you're going to die out, just like the blue links are about to die out.
Okay, so it's evolve or die.
Brilliant. Darwinism in search.
Yes. Great. Wow, it's been a load of fun, and yeah, very entertaining, but very informational. Yeah, it's the future of search, and I still love what you came up with. The SEO is AEO, and
can I sing it to say goodbye?
Well, you certainly can. I'd love you to sing it and take us out, and we'll say goodbye after that. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was absolutely gloriously lovely. And even though it's 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm feeling quite chirpy and cheerful. SEO is AEO. Thank you, Peter Mead. And everyone else.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.